Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all at the 2022 Economist of the Year virtual launch event. My name is Dion Tustin. I'm the CEO of the Bureau of Market Research at the University of South Africa. My task today is to officially open this online event and welcome and thank you all for sacrificing your valuable time to attend this occasion, which will be recorded for replay purposes by those who unfortunately could not be able to join today's online gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, I think alongside the high levels of excitement in the run-up to this event, we received very sad news earlier this week of the passing of a dear colleague, friend, and co-economist, Mike Schuessler. His passing left profound sorrow in the many lives whom Mike had a direct, overwhelming positive impact on. Mike impacted on the lives of many through the economic views he expressed and the benefits they accrued from his policy and program recommendations. He was also blessed with a big heart for people and for society, and cared deeply about the common citizenry and advocated a variety of economic ideas aimed at improving the lives of people in general. Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly request a moment of silence in remembrance of Mike, who on 2 occasions has been announced the champion or winner of the Media 24 Economist of the Year competition. And colleagues, I want to break the silence and your deep thoughts and maybe express a farewell message to Mike from all of us. Rest in peace, Mike, and may the angels play you the hard rock and classical music that you loved so much. May there be a lot of discussion partners on the other side, and may you have vibrant discourses with Keynes, Hayek, Smith, and all the other masters of economics that passed away before you. You will truly be missed, but you will always remain in our hearts and minds. Gone, but never forgotten. Rest in peace, Mike. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Economist of the Year competition was hosted for several decades by South Africa's leading media company, Media 24. However, during 2021, Media 24 decided to relinquish this prestigious competition. Now, at the time of withdrawing as the competition host, the Bureau of Market Research was approached by Media 24 to annex the competition. Fortunately, and due to the prestigious nature of the competition, the transfer of the ownership of the competition to the BMR was thankfully supported by well-renowned economists who have for many years competed in the event and to whom you have been introduced in the build-up online slide presentation. May I, with this said, welcome and thank all economists for registering for the 2022 competition and for attending today's event. Now, despite good or bad intentions motivating your attendance and enrollment, I am confident that today's launch will maybe just provide all candidates with an ideal opportunity to carefully scrutinize your competitors and the rules, which may just provide you with the competitive edge which you were all hoping for to be crowned as the next Economist of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, the key rationale for the support for the continuance of the competition is because the competition has for long occupied the center stage of economic thinking and growth projections in our country. Now, recognizing the strategic value of the competition, the BMR agreed to take ownership of the competition since the start of 2022. Now, to sustain the traction of the competition, the BMR commenced by setting up the required management and administrative systems to host the 2022 Economist of the Year competition. And in advance, I would also like to sincerely express my gratitude and acknowledge the entire Economist of the Year project team who are involved in this exciting initiative and who will also be introduced to the audience later in the program. So, since the start of 2022, the BMR has rebranded and marketed the competition to include existing and new participants. And of course, which secured then a much broader and representative panel. Resultantly, a total of 35 top economists in South Africa were invited and entered the 2022 competition. The competition commenced in February 22 and is ongoing on a monthly basis. By attending this event, you as spectators will have an ideal opportunity to be exposed to the panel of economists and to glance into the economic crystal ball. However, it is not just about the competition, ladies and gentlemen, but also the strategic value concealed within this great initiative. In this regard, the value of the Economist of the Year competition is strategically nestled in the timely predictions of leading economic indicators which guides macroeconomic forecast, the emerging stage of business cycles, and investment decisions in our country. Also, the relevance of the competition is soundly rooted in Goal 8 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which, as we all know, aim to promote sustainable economic growth. Now, sustained and inclusive economic growth are prerequisites for sustainable development, which can contribute to improve livelihoods of people, and economic growth can also lead to new and better employment opportunities and provide greater economic security for all. Moreover, rapid growth, especially among the least developed and developing countries, can also help them to reduce the wage gap relative to developed countries, thereby diminishing the glaring inequalities between the rich and the poor. These value propositions, ladies and gentlemen, collectively exclaims the importance to promote economic growth, predictions, and debates in South Africa. In fact, the Economist of the Year competition closely resembles this notion and consequently presents an ideal opportunity to develop the competition as a trademark in support of sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I want to declare this online event as officially open. I have already acknowledged the presence of all economists, and I would also like to recognize the attendance of our BMR subscriber members, our UNISA representatives, and I've noted the Dean of Economic and Management Sciences being part of our audience. Thank you, Prof. Mogale, for joining us, and all the business ambassadors who are welcomed at today's event. And in typical research style, and in an attempt to use the correct terminology to define an online Teams meeting or population, I would like to confirm with you that we have close to 50 vault dwellers who are assembled in the online meeting room today. I would like to thank you in advance for your attendance and your support. And I want you to please all join me in my closeout message to the panel of economists. And here I go. May your predictions come true. However, please remember there are also many predictions that have not come true, at least not yet anyway. It's true, we are left astounded by the truth of past predictions. And I want to repeat that, if you will allow. May your predictions come true. However, please remember there are also many predictions that have not come true, at least not yet anyway. It's true, we are left astounded by the truth of past predictions. Ladies and gentlemen, at the start of a traditional in-person meeting, pre-COVID days, attendants were usually directed to the bathrooms for a convenience break. Unfortunately, I cannot afford you this opportunity in an online environment. That you can decide by yourself, but I would sincerely like to practice good virtual etiquette and cyber ethics by requesting all vault dwellers, that includes all of you, to mute your microphones during the event. But in the same vein, I would like to invite you to please chat your chat in the chat box as all the chats and the online event unfolds. Please feel free to do an online introduction of yourself or your company using the chat box, and in this manner, we believe that you will experience a true online presence and acquaintance at today's online gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you will enjoy today's event in the company of the leading economist of our country. Indeed, the BMR is honored to host this event with the illustrious company of this virtual audience and all virtual dwellers. Ladies and gentlemen, to tell you more about the 2022 Economist of the Year competition, I now hand over to Professor Karel van Aert, who's the Research Director at the Bureau of Market Research, and he's also a former participant of the Economist of the Year competition, who will also introduce you to the adjudication panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you and enjoy the launch event. Prof. Karel.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and very welcome at this event. And this is really a fantastic experience, this being the first time that the group of economists participating in this illustrious competition are actually together. So what I'll be doing today is to basically take you through the first part of the presentation, namely focusing on the Economist of the Year competition. And as I say there, alia jacta est, which means the die is cast, and as you as economists are doing is putting your viewpoint in writing with respect to the competition. I'll show you that the competition is an existing competition in a new cloak. Next one. The first question here is that why an Economist of the Year competition? And there's a variety of reasons as to the contribution that this competition can make. Firstly, it's for the public benefit to provide up-to-date economic forecast information to society. And in this regard, is that I think this competition play a very important role. And in this instance, it's important to note that we've already spoken to Media 24, and they are willing to publish the results of the competition. And also is that there's companies that requested the BMR to host the information also on their websites. As you've already seen, you received from Pamela a request to give permission that such information might be shared, because we may not publish this information and share it before everybody has given permission. Unfortunately, there's still a few outstanding permissions that we're following up at present, if you've wondered why you haven't seen this in the press. So we believe that the earlier everybody agrees that this could be used, the quicker we can actually go big with respect to the media and realize the true public benefit. Secondly, it's also got a business benefit to contribute economic information required by businesses for decision making and strategic planning purposes. And in this regard is that the whole idea of the competition is also to roll this out to businesses. And what will be happening in this regard is that we will be hosting webinars where economists participating in this competition will be given the opportunity to share in discussions, to also basically talk to business and provide information that they've generated to businesses, to academic benefit, to encourage the development of a more accurate and more robust economic forecasting methods. And as you know, that Corneille has done a lot of work in this regard, also showing, for example, that economists are fairly accurate with some of the predictions and not so accurate with some of the others. And a lot of work in research has already been done to determine, for example, why economists are accurate in some and not so accurate in other. Policy benefit in the sense to also to inform policy. Also very important here, also in honor of Mike, as a marketing benefit to market the economic profession to society at large. And we're looking at more opportunities also to actually use the information for the competition. And then also for the personal benefit of the various economists to encourage healthy competition and discourse between economists. Next one. Next slide. Okay, so the question now is that what is changing under BMR management with the BMR having taken over the competition? Firstly, there will be incremental changes. The aim is not to change everything at once, but to have a phased approach. And at the start of the year, we had to set up quite a lot of systems, and I think the team did an excellent job of doing that. And a big part of that system was to put in a system to talk to the various economists and to obtain the forecast on a monthly basis. And I think Pamela de Jong has been doing an excellent work in that regard. And then Jacques and Corneille that have been very involved in the adjudication processes in analyzing the data that was obtained. Also, is that this year there will be two competitions. There will be an Economist of the Year competition and also a Junior Economist of the Year. And the whole aim of this is also to encourage a lot of the younger participants also to be fully part of this competition, and also to be recognized for outstanding work in forecasting. Then also, as indicated, the webinars, we could to provide a platform for participating economists to share their forecast and their views regarding the economy. And it's very important also to get the views out there. Then slowly but surely, to ensure greater representativeness of the participants, as Dion already indicated, that what's currently going on is that we at the beginning of the year contacted a wider range of economists, asking them to participate. Some of them did not see their way open to participate for this year, but most probably for next year. Also here is that to ensure that there's much more economic research and to encourage research using the obtained forecast. And also, as you will see, that there's a new look and feel for the competition, new branding. As you can see, this beautiful branding that was prepared by the team. There are new faces that's you are currently meeting. there are new rules and more impact. And so in the next one, let's just have a look then at the rules. Next slide. Next slide, please. So what are the rules? The first one, the first rule in this regard is that only professional economists, taking into account the qualifications and the profession that's being practiced, will be allowed to participate. And the aim of doing this is also then to ensure that there's a high level of inclusivity as well as exclusivity among the various participants in the competition. Also, is that during January of each year, a list of economic variables for consideration will be circulated and voted upon, and this list will be the final list for the year. As you can remember, during January, we first requested you to provide us with a list of the variables that you think that should be forecasted. Based on that, we made a long list and we circulated that back to you. And I must thank in this regard, especially Mike, because I've had a lot of discussions at the beginning of the year with Mike. Mike also did a lot of analysis on the various variables, and he proposed others as well. So what will be happening now is that you'll be doing forecast on those that were selected by yourself. And so next year, in January, there will be once again be an opportunity to have a look at the various variables and also then to add possible variables in a list, which will also then be voted upon. The next rule is that forecast may not be changed after monthly submission. And in this regard is that we will also assume that if you don't send in a forecast, that your previous forecast that you sent the previous month will still stand. By entering the competition, participating economists agree to the use of forecasts for media and research purposes, as indicated that there's still a few outstanding that we'll be following up at the moment. My feeling is that we should draw a line in the sand, and because of all the economists thus far, there was none that objected to this being used. It's only that a few haven't responded yet, etc. But somewhere we need to make a decision, and maybe today could be a very good opportunity to decide that we draw a line in the sand, and that because there were no objections, that we can go ahead to use that for media purposes as well as for research purposes, and providing that figures to other institutions. And also the adjudication results of the adjudicator panel will be final. So this is the basic rules to the competition. I've told my colleagues yesterday is that this is very weird for me to indicate these type of rules. Sorry, Pamela's got a hand up.
No, sorry, Prof. I just wanted to indicate that I can see the next slide.
Oh, thanks. Then just looking at the competition program, as you know that in January, as we've done, that was the time to prepare for the competition. Also then to decide on that final list, and then the competition will run through these various months, and during which there will be monthly submission of economic forecast and publication of the competition results. Typically what happens is that Pamela asks, as you've experienced, for your forecast. That is then provided by Pamela to Corneille and to Jacqueline. Corneille as the head of the adjudication team and Jacolis working with Corneille on that. And then in next year, April, the adjudication will happen, and during May next year, the winners, namely the Senior and Junior Economist of the Year, will be announced. Questions have been raised with respect to the competition winner for 2021. That adjudication has already happened, and the results have been provided for Media 24, but it's their decision because it was still their competition as to exactly when that will be announced. But the commitment from our side is that in April 2023 that the adjudication will place and the winner will be announced shortly thereafter in May 2023. Next slide. My apologies for one of the reasons. Okay, who are the competition management team members? This is just the various members. This is firstly is Dion Tustin, the CEO of the Bureau of Market Research. Then also involved is Professor Paul Kibuka. He is the head of the Economic Research Division. I'm involved, and then Professor Corneille van Walbeek from the Economics Department from UCT. Heading up the competition adjudication panel. Then Jacolis Meyering, and she'll be co-presenting with Corneille, and you'll hear her voice later on as well. And she is the head of our personal finance research unit. Then Pamela, that you've already had a lot of engagements with, as well as Madeleine Goetz, that also run the public relations with respect to the competition. There's a good question from Corneille, but I think we can address that in the later during the presentation. Okay, having indicated the Economist of the Year competition, next slide. Having indicated the background to the competition, as well as how the competition has run up to this stage, I then want to hand over to my colleagues, Corneille van Walbeek from UCT and Jacolis Meyering from the BMR, that will be taking you through the procedures and the adjudication process. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
So thanks very much, Carl. Thanks very much, Dion, and good morning to all the people in the virtual room. It is nice seeing you, at least knowing that you are there behind your computers. So I'm Corneille van Walbeek. I'm from the University of Cape Town, as has been indicated, and I will just go through some of the procedures and specifically the adjudication process. So I've been the formal adjudicator for last year and the year before. But even for the previous 8 or so years, I worked very closely with Professor Ian Smith from the University of Stellenbosch Graduate School of Business, who was the official adjudicator of the competition. And in fact, he was the founding adjudicator for the competition. I've taken over many of the principles. In fact, I haven't changed all that much, but I think it's just useful for everybody to understand on how this particular thing works. So as Carl has indicated to you previously, at the beginning of the year, we asked what are the variables that there is a demand for. In the past, this list was a bit bigger. It had become bigger over time as there was a perceived need. And eventually for 2022, these 8 variables have been chosen. The first one is the real annual GDP growth rate for 2022. The second one is the annual household expenditure growth, in other words, consumption growth for the year, and the inflation rate for the year. In fact, if one looks at international forecasting competitions, the 2 variables that pop out nearly all the time is in fact the first one and the third one, in other words, GDP growth and inflation rate. And then there are a variety of other variables that come in not necessarily a consistent format, but still in some or other format similar to what we have in the current competition. So the fourth variable is the average yield on long-term government bonds in the fourth quarter. So these are 10-year plus bonds. In the past, participants would recall that there was a focus on a very specific bond, but as the horizon for that particular bond became closer, we often find that there were some distortions in it, and sometimes we had the embarrassing situation that we were forecasting something that had already expired in the previous year. So rather than having a specific bond that is being targeted, we are targeting the 10-year plus bond as it is indicated in the South African Reserve Bank Quarterly Bulletin, where we will then evaluate the predictions against the actuals for the fourth quarter of the forecast year. Then, of course, the prime interest rate is a very important one, and there what we're focusing on is the average of the prime interest rate in the fourth quarter. If there's a change in the interest rate in the fourth quarter, we work out a weighted average based on the number of days in which the interest rate was a particular level, and then weighted with the other days in which the interest rate has then changed. The other variable that we're focusing on is the average rand-dollar exchange rate. Again, the average for the fourth quarter, the average Brent oil price in the fourth quarter, and then lastly, the current account balance as a percentage of the GDP for the whole year. In the past, we asked this to be the actual balance of the current account. In other words, so many billion in current prices. This time it's done slightly differently, and we're focusing on this as a percentage of GDP rather than as an absolute amount. Next slide. Okay, so Carl has already mentioned a number of these things in terms of the process. At the moment, we've got 35 economists that are registered to participate in 2022. This is a relatively large number. The most we've ever had, I think, was 38 or 39. So we are very much at the top end in terms of the number of people participating. And what we find is that, or what we want is that participants submit their predictions to Pamela de Jong at the beginning of the year, and that then becomes the baseline. Of course, as indicated, participants provide consent to publish their predictions. The consensus forecast and the individual forecast are published as a media release. Just by the way, in the past, the consensus forecast was typically presented as an average, in other words, the mean of the different forecasts. I did some research on that, and the research suggests quite strongly that the median forecast is generally speaking, although not exclusively so, but generally speaking, over an extended period of time, is a better predictor and more accurate than the mean, for the simple reason that the mean takes cognizance of outliers, whereas the median does not get influenced by extreme outliers that could be a mistake, or that could be sent in by somebody who wants to take a very extreme view for reasons that are not necessarily obvious up front, but that do have an impact on the mean of that value. So from this point on, and in fact from last year already, we are working on the median as being the consensus forecast. And then the last 2 points are already indicated. Next slide, please. I think it might be jammed. Yakulis. Okay, here we go. So in other words, participants, as you have experienced at the beginning of the year, you get asked to come up with a forecast for the 8 different variables. Of course, the first forecast is often the most difficult one to make because it's the beginning of the year. Everything is still very uncertain. There's a lot of things that can happen during the course of the year that are unknowable at that point in time. And then one probably needs to take a view of reality and then say, based on this view of reality, these are the forecasts that I'm going to put together. So there's no let's call it, support and view of other economists when you make that first forecast, and that is just normal. Subsequently, what we find is that you can evaluate your forecast relative to other people. So I was a participant for more than 10 years in this competition till about four years ago. And basically what I did for myself is looking at my forecast relative to that of the median. I would say, do I take a more positive view of GDP or do I take a more negative view of GDP? And I would then usually adjust my forecasts relative to what other participants were doing. Of course, one needs to have, or some participants have a specific model. Others work on a gut feel and don't necessarily have a formal model. How you come up with these forecasts, that is your own prerogative. The important thing is that this information is available and you are in a position to be able to compare your forecast for these different variables against others. All right, so at the end of each month, we produce the consensus forecast as indicated. Then at the beginning of the following year, in fact, in about April, I do the adjudication and I base it on the March quarterly bulletin of the next year, which then, of course, refers back to the actual values as they have been estimated and calculated by the South African Reserve Bank. Of course, some of you might say, yes, but some of these numbers are going to be subject to change. Of course, that is true. We know that that is particularly true for the GDP numbers as well as for the consumption figure numbers. Some of these others might change, but usually do not. But what we are basing the actual values on is the first release of the full year of the year in which we are focusing on. Right, so that is then the benchmark. One can say in retrospect, well, because of data changes and because of revisions of the data, one is then in a position to say, well, I should have actually won because of those kind of things. Sadly, that doesn't hold water, and we will be working on the first release of the actual data. So the formula that I use has been developed by Professor Ian Smith. You see the formula over there. Basically, what we do is there is an actual value. That actual value is not known at the beginning of the year. That's the value that we are estimating. There are, in principle, for each and every variable and for each and every forecaster, there are 11 different forecasts. One for February, one for March, for April, all the way through to November and to December. What I do is, using an Excel spreadsheet, I calculate the error terms as the difference between the known actual, once that is known in March of the following year, and the individual forecasts that have been made in each of the 11 months in the preceding year. I square that, gets rid of all the negatives, and so we're working with the squared errors each time. And then what I do is I weight the errors according to the following principle. And the principle is it's much harder to estimate something at the beginning of the year than at the end of the year. In December, we've got a pretty good idea of what the inflation rate is going to be. The average inflation rate is going to be for the whole year. So you're not being super fantastic if you can accurately predict that. You are a hero if you can predict the inflation rate at the beginning of the year. So what the formula does is it weights the errors at the beginning of the year much more heavily than what it weights the errors at the end of the year. And I'm simply using the methodology that Professor Ian Smith came up with. And I said, the weighting that we give to February is 11, to March is 10, to April is 9, all the way through November is 2, and the weighting in December is equal to 1. I then calculate this weighted squared, sum of weighted squared errors. Sorry, it's complicated. The sum of weighted square errors. I calculate that for each and every variable and for each and every participant. Then for a particular variable, I then rank each one of them, and the person with the lowest sum of squared residuals gets the value of 1. The person with the highest, in other words, the least accurate sum of squared residuals gets the value of 35. Why 35? Because there are 35 participants. And then what we do is I do that for each and every of the 8 different variables. I add all these rankings together, and eventually the person who ends up with the lowest aggregate ranking, that person is then the winner. In this process, I also use the consensus forecast as a participant. It has happened in the past that the consensus forecast has actually won. In fact, not so very many years ago, the consensus forecast won, and then of course one would then choose the first real person as opposed to the consensus forecast as being the winner. We typically find that over an extended period of time, the consensus forecast tends to do rather well. So I did a study about 2 years ago where I looked at individual forecasters over an extended period of time, and it was a bit of a naming game, but it was very clear that the consensus forecast was the most consistent forecaster over an extended period of time, even though in individual years it may not be quite the best, but usually the consensus performs quite well. So with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them afterwards, but I'm now going to give the floor to Yakulis, and she will be taking some things further. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Corneille. Yes, I just want to sincerely apologize to everybody attending. There seems to be a little bit of a delay in the slides. That's the wonders of having something that's online and technological glitches, as you're all aware of. But from my side, I will then maybe just give you an idea of what do the crystal balls say for 2022 so far. For each of those 8 variables specifically, let's start first with the real annual GDP growth. What we can see there, in each of the respective months, the little dots is each of our participating economists' predictions for each of the years. You will clearly see for the year, you will clearly see with, for example, the annual GDP growth, there was a larger spread in February 2022 in the predictions, and that has started to narrow down as the year progressed. So the latest consensus forecast actually indicating 1.8% annual GDP growth in real terms expected for 2022. Then if we look towards the real annual household expenditure growth, the average has remained there to be around the 2.2% number, the latest consensus forecast indicating 2.1%. Then on the annual inflation rate, we could see as the year progressed, there's been a significant increase in the estimates, and that is as the year unfolded with international occurrences that definitely influence, for example, the oil price, etc., impacting our local inflation rate. Then if we look to the yield on long-term government bonds, the latest consensus forecast indicated the 9.9 as indicated for May 2022. The prime interest rate, that once again running with the expectations most likely of what's happening with inflation. So prime interest rate expected, the consensus forecast of 8.5 given in May 2022. Once again, you can see there was quite a spread starting the year off, and all our participants are in the similar ranges of just above 9 to just below 8% for the year. The average US dollar South African rand exchange rate, what we could see, our latest consensus forecast there, 15 rand and 65 cents to the US dollar, and that obviously also being influenced by international occurrences. Brent crude oil price starting the year out in February at $78, increasing with the latest consensus forecast at $95. And you can clearly in this case see, as the year progressed, that significant increase by all of our competitors. And then current account as a percentage of GDP, we see a spread of positive, the positive ratio as well as negative ratio predictions, but the consensus forecast for May 2022 covering in at 1% to the GDP in South Africa. Then with that, I will then gladly open up the floor for any questions and open up a conversation to provide answers to any questions that you might have. So for this, please raise your virtual hand and unmute yourself when asked if there are any questions, or you're welcome to post your questions in the comments. I know there's the one question regarding the Young Economist of the Year, which we can maybe have a quick discussion about. And then if due to time constraints, we will not be able to address your question, we will definitely be in contact with you following this session. So if I can, then I'm just going to have a look at my screen here from my side. If there are any questions, pertinent questions, you're welcome. Maybe perhaps if we can, Prof. Tustin, yes, please.
Thank you, Ms. Meyering. Now, I just saw the one question around the younger economist of the year, and I think we would rather refer to the younger than a youth one. I think what we had in mind here, just to answer Corné, is to say that younger in terms of maybe not only a relative age within the pool of economists participating, but also in terms of the years of participating in the competition. Because I think our idea was to add on that accolade, being that it will also then obviously encourage and acknowledge the relatively younger population economist, if I can put it that way, because somewhere we need to also look at strategies that over the medium to longer term can bring a bit of sustainability to the competition as well. So I think that was the thought behind the Young Economist of the, or awarding the Young Economist of the Year as well. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Prof. I see there was a question from Daniel Meyer. Do you exclude the significant outlier forecast for the consensus? Corné, maybe I can direct that question to you, please.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Daniel. And if I may also address Johan's question about the outlier should be being excluded. I would prefer that they don't get included. And the reason why I wouldn't say that is some things look impossible at the beginning of the year, but they end up happening. So at the beginning of 2020, if anybody came and said GDP is going to grow at -5%, that number would be excluded on the grounds of complete impossibility. However, the actual GDP growth for 2020 turned out to be -7% or something in that order. So one could argue that the person who comes in at -5% at the beginning of the year was absolutely prescient in terms of the predictions that he or she has made. So looking at your graphs, Jacqueline, there are a number there that do seem quite weird, a little bit out, but it doesn't have an impact on the consensus forecast. And the reason is because the consensus, as I've indicated, is it's a median. So the median simply gets rid of all the outliers. Unless everybody's an outlier, then of course that doesn't apply. But outliers by definition are just one or two or three forecasts that are just very much outside of range. So I would argue quite strongly that we don't exclude them for the simple reason that they may be right, and there may be reputational issues for the people who are coming out with outliers or with very, very strange numbers. They must take the reputational, let's call it, risk for themselves, and the glory, if they are quite right, that comes with publishing a number that is a little bit out of the ordinary. Of course, sometimes there could be a, let's call it, an error. And what I mean by an error is, let's say that we are asking for the prime interest rate, but the person by accident thinks it's the repo rate. And then one could go back, and I think that would be Pam's job, to go to the person and say, are you quite sure? And if the person says, yes, I'm quite sure that this is what I'm estimating for the prime rate, it's not the repo rate and all the rest of it, then we should accept that. I think that is an important principle. So I hope that addresses the issue, Jacolis.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I hope that does indeed answer both Daniel and Joanne Elsa's questions relating to that. And I think a very important component as well is that the consensus forecast in the end is one of the participants, treated as one of the participants in the end result. So yes, it influences as we see over time the consensus. As explained now, it doesn't explain, it doesn't influence because it is the median. So it's the outliers doesn't have that significant impact. But in the end, each participant's views are then not compared to the consensus, but then actually to the actual results in the outcome. If there are any other questions, let me first ask one extra round. Any additional questions? Okay, I don't see any hands. You're welcome to then let me then just from my side on that side. You're welcome to then contact Pamela with the email addresses indicated there on the screen if there are any questions. So please allow me the last few moments. I see we've got a few minutes left. So just quickly want to remind you of the program of the competition. I saw that Prof. Tussin also indicated relating to the webinar, etc. So I want to specifically remind you of the 2 upcoming webinars aimed for July and October this year. So during these webinars, you'll be able to interact with a panel of economists on pertinent topics. So please keep an eye out for communication from the BMR and our social media platforms as indicated there on the screen closer to the time. Please feel free to contact our administrative office on the email address provided if you have any predictions relating to the competition or this morning's presentations. And with that then, I would like to conclude with, in the words of Benjamin Graham, no prediction, whether of a repetition of past patterns or of a complete break with past patterns, can be proved in advance to be right. The BMR looks forward to the rest of the year to see how the economic reality unfolds and which of our participants will receive the prestigious title of Economist of the Year for 2022. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. May you all have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.